What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the show. This is the Science Dispatch podcast. My name is Cameron English. Very excited to be with you as always, joined by my colleague Anna Delaski and our special guest, also my colleague, Dr. Liza Lockwood. It's so good to see both of you.
It's good to see you. It's good to finally meet you, Anna.
Oh, so nice to meet you. I feel like I've known you for a while, following your stuff on social media. It's just great to virtually meet you.
And vice versa.
I did something funny, at least it's funny to me, Liza. I was doing our other show and I did it solo because you were traveling. And so I started the introduction and I went, I'm Cameron English, and she's not here. So we were just talking about how sleepy I am, and that's just the reality of parenthood. But anyways, I'm glad everyone's here. Enough of the small talk, enough of the chit chat. So we've been doing this series, Liza, where we interview science communicators. We've had Dr. Simon Machling on the show, who is just a wizard on X, has a huge following. He riles up the trolls. He's just really good. So we got his insight on some of these questions. And then we talked to Dr. Jess Steyer, who is a really good scientist, but also, I want to say, like, she's got mommy blogger vibes in the best way. Like, she goes into the mom groups on Instagram and she offers her insight and she goes, hey, I'm a mom. Let me tell you what's actually true about this. And so we want to add you to the all-star lineup of science communicators and get your insight, because you're a mom, of course, but you're also a doctor, you're a scientist, you have a very wide-ranging field of expertise and experience. And so let's start there. Who are you? What do you do? Give us a little background and why you are the masochist you are, and you go on X and you talk to people, because we get the craziest things. And if you want to bring those up, feel free. But yeah, let's start there.
Yeah, so I'm Liza Lockwood. I'm an emergency medicine physician and a medical toxicologist, and I work in agriculture. And lots of people say, how did an emergency doctor wind up in ag? Well, agriculture is having a little bit of an emergency because only 2% of our population farms and feeds not just the rest of the 98% of us, but they also export 25% of what they make, so they're really critical for food security. And having been involved in global health and humanitarian work and One Health projects during my medical career, I began to realize how important nutrition and agricultural policy was for public health. And a lot of people don't sort of think that there's an intersection between the two, but there really is. And there's so much misinformation and disinformation about agriculture in the popular press that I feel like it's critically important to get that information right before people make some decisions that might have a negative impact on their state of health and nutrition. So I spend a fair amount of my time trying to dispel mythology.
What would you say is the risk we're facing? Because we've talked about this to death, but I think it's always worth talking about more. What's on the horizon if people get what they want? If the Maha crowd gets what they seem to want, what are we flirting with? I think there's some danger on the horizon. What are your thoughts?
I don't think it can be overstated what the risk that we are taking by romanticizing subsistence farming, right? So we have 10,000 years of experience with organic farming and 50 years of food security in the West because of scientific advances in agriculture. We also, and in 1900, lived to the ripe old age of 45, and 45% of the population farmed, and most of them were subsistence farmers. By the end of the 20th century, we had less than 2% of the population farming, like I said, but had gained an unprecedented 35-year increase in life expectancy. And that's because of 5 public health advances of the 20th century. And those are the development of antibiotics and discovery of antibiotics, which wound up curing kids from previously life-threatening diseases like strep and staph. The development of vaccines, which eradicated smallpox from the planet, which is an amazing, feat. Food security, and that's because of the scientific advances we've made in agriculture. Vector control, the control of insects and rodents and creatures that have caused absolute devastating pandemics globally repeatedly. And in parts of the world, those risks are still there. There's 24/7 pressure from mosquitoes on global populations with malaria and dengue and other life-threatening diseases. And water sanitation, introducing chlorine in treatment for water and fluoride to water wound up, getting rid of devastating diseases like typhus and cholera, and so we don't see those in the Western Hemisphere, in the West very often because of these things that we've been able to do that made these public health advances very, very important. Additionally, for women, there's a really interesting discovery that we made in the 1930s. There's a fungal crop pathogen called ergot that in the Middle Ages routinely killed vast swaths of the population because it caused vasoconstriction to their arms and legs. So their arms and legs would turn black and fall off. It would cause miscarriages because of vasoconstriction to the uterus. And people would have seizures and hallucinations and all sorts of stuff. Well, over the years, they discovered that this crop pathogen, once they figured out sort of biochemistry and pharmacology, had a chemical in it that could stop postpartum hemorrhage, and it was called ergonovine. And so when that was isolated from ergot, it revolutionized obstetrics. And in 1935, a synthetic version, and people always talk about Mother Nature and how wonderful Mother Nature is. The synthetic versions are often better. But the synthetic version was created, methyl ergonovine, and that's still used in obstetrics today. And it really, really put a pause on how many women died from postpartum hemorrhage. So those 6 things revolutionized human health. And I'm watching the systematic dismantling of those advances by the medical establishment and MAHA, and it's concerning to me.
Do you think, this is my speculation, is that people, they take the condition today as the default, right? Like,
yes.
The lights just work, the air conditioner works, there's food in the store. This is just the baseline, and we can only make it better if we would just go back to the red barn as the image that always comes up. And that, of course, is completely backwards.
Exactly.
The way of life was you're dead at 40, and, hopefully you don't get bit by this or that critter.
If you made it past 5, right? If you made it past 5. Yeah, and I think people take for granted these advances, and they sort of are looking for something to be worried about. So, the fact that we survive to long enough to get chronic diseases, because we are mortal, we're living long enough to get these chronic diseases. So the discussion now is that we've got to revert back to these old style of farming and alternative medicine because of this epidemic of chronic diseases, heart disease, strokes, cancer, obesity, diabetes, and those kinds of things. But the reality is that, once again, those are largely diseases of aging, and there are things that we can do to try to prevent type 2 diabetes and obesity, but romanticizing practices of the past in order to address these diseases of having the fortune to live long enough is not going to fix it. It's actually going to make the Middle Ages great again, right? As opposed to making medicine great. We're spending all sorts of time and resources and taxpayer dollars investigating things that we already are very well. We've established a body of science that is so profoundly deep in so many of these areas, and we know that they're so revolutionary that keeping on spending taxpayer dollars in this arena and investigating what it's like to go back to organic farming, it's really not going to move the needle. It's actually going to set us back. There are real world examples of this. I mean, if you look at what happened in the Soviet Union, Nikolai Vavilov was one of the top plant geneticists in Soviet agriculture. And we still use some of his plant breeding techniques to this day. He was the person who came up with the idea for a seed bank. So if there were ever some catastrophe, you would have a storage of seeds that you could reintroduce agriculture from. So brilliant plant scientist. He got caught in the crosshairs of Stalin's agriculture minister by the name of Trofim Lysenko. And Trofim Lysenko didn't believe in genetics. And this was the fairly early days of genetics. This was a early 20th century. And Trofim Lysenko fabricated his research, making claims that he could grow different kinds of crops, peas in particular, in frigid conditions, and that this would, that he had come up with a way to, make these crops more productive. And it turned out to be totally untrue. But if you didn't agree with him, you wound up going to the Gulag. And so Soviet agriculture was not only collectivized, which resulted in famine, but it also started implementing unscientific practices that became popular as opposed to scientifically based. And you had starvation where 30 some odd million people died. Nikolai Vavilov, because he crossed paths with or got into Trofim Lysenko's crosshairs, wound up getting sent to the Gulag, where he starved to death. And it was only after Stalin died was he recognized for the contributions that he made to Soviet agriculture. The other real life, we sort of think, that's probably remote history, that won't happen again. The other real life scenario that we've seen that in is in Sri Lanka. And in 2021, in April of 2021, Sri Lanka decided overnight to go all organic, and that was supported by a whole lot of popular mainstream press and a lot of the claims coming out of the medical establishment. And it was Sri Lanka at the time had been recognized by the UN to be one of the models of how to emerge from really difficult circumstances and become successful in a short amount of time. They were just coming out of a 27-year civil war. They'd been hit with this huge tsunami that killed lots of their population, and then they wound up doing very well in the mid-teens. And then overnight implemented, for a variety of different reasons, but it implemented organic farming and poor agricultural policies, and the floor fell out from underneath them, and they still haven't recovered. They wound up, the population eventually rose up. They had food shortage lines, energy shortage, everything. Medical establishment fell apart, and they wound up, the population rose up and overran the presidential palace. The president had to escape, and they still haven't recovered. Agriculture is the foundation of civilization, and people forget it. They take it for granted.
It's interesting, Liza, because you talk about, living through these medical advancements, and we've lived long enough now to where we're fighting others on social media, fighting misinformation, essentially. And, I noticed your bio says multitasker, myth buster, and storyteller, which I would argue that you combine all three quite well. But myth busting, right, has such a dramatic feel to it, which I think is necessary to attract people's attention on social media. Is that sort of the intent with your post? Like, how do you find the balance between like the clear scientific reporting and then being somewhat dramatic, right? To sort of lure people in to the accuracy of science. Like, this is what I need you to hear.
Yeah. So the stakes are really high, and the people who are, I call them the Baptists and the bandits. There are people who are actively generating disinformation, and I don't mean to a lot of in conservative circles, when you hear the term disinformation, a lot of people think you're trying to censor somebody. But that's not the goal. You have to figure out how to deal with people who are making fraudulent claims, that they are untrue, right? And they are making claims that then wind up benefiting them in some capacity or not. But then those are the bandits, right? They have books to sell, they have supplements to sell, they've got a reason to financially gain from, or not just financially, but in popularity and things like that, gain from some of these fraudulent claims that they're making. And then you've got the Baptists, who are the as Stalin would call them, useful idiots, who, and I don't mean that as an insult, I mean that these people genuinely believe that there is great harm being done, and if they get activated to participate in going after these advances, they think that they're doing good, and that they haven't really ever entertained the other side. And so, farmers and modern farming techniques get demonized. Industry is on the sharp, pointy tip of the spear all the time. And the claim is that industry's only interest is for profit, and therefore you can't trust anything coming out of industry. There's been really a firewall built between academia and industry because of the claims that industry is unduly influencing academia. People forget that the scientists in industry, during COVID, for example, their families were all locked down. They weren't allowed to go to school. They had to wear masks. They had all the same things happening to their families. And so when this mRNA vaccine was developed, it looked like something that was miraculous. And unfortunately, it got completely eviscerated because of the way a lot of the COVID policies were working, and it created a whole lot of distrust. I think it's so important for people to understand what's at stake. I also think it's very important to try to be very neutral in terms of your political persuasion. The different political parties have been able to really polarize groups, and science has been lost in the discussion. If you don't fall into line with one side or the other because you don't agree with every single concept or political position of one side or the other, you often find yourself in a no man's land. And I think that there are very many people who find themselves in that particular field, and they don't know what's the scientific truth and what's not. The last thing I'll say on this topic is that there are so many scientists who are out there that are that don't communicate with mere mortals. they wind up, having a PhD in this, that, and the other, and can only talk in such a detailed level about their science that they lose the audience. And this can happen to, and I shouldn't even say mere mortals, because this happens to scientists from different disciplines. Often scientists from different disciplines overestimate their ability to interpret something because they have a scientific background. And you see this with physicians a lot. Physicians think, oh, well, I of course can interpret all of this toxicology and epidemiology because I'm a doctor and I read, the epidemiology around my particular field. So they think that they can extrapolate that knowledge. And often they're mistaken. And so they are, in your own discipline, you might be an expert, but you're really a layperson in a different discipline. And so I think it's important to be able to communicate to a range of different people. It's really critically important not to be condescending about it. And I think that scientists have often are very, very smart, can come off as condescending, and have a hard time explaining their science at a high level. And I think that that's a critical skill right now.
I think one of your strengths, having worked alongside you for so long, is that you are willing to show up and talk to pretty much anybody. And I've seen the benefit that yields. Namely, someone will show up and they'll say really rude things that you wouldn't say to a person in normal life, right? You're a pharma shill, you're owned by big this and that, and you're lying to me about my children's health so you can make money. And you never lose your cool, which is really impressive, for one thing. But then you say, well, I'm a mom, as you were saying with COVID, right? Like, I couldn't go anywhere. I had to wear a mask. It sucked for me too, right? I was right there with you, right? We were in the trenches together, so to speak. We had someone show up to our space, I think it was last week, and he was going on about, pharma this and you're a shill, and you were like, yeah, but I don't agree with any of that. I agree with everything you just said about what was wrong with the COVID response. And the guy was sort of dumbstruck, like it hadn't occurred to him that you might just be a normal person and that you're trying to get to the right answer just like he is. And I could see in real time he was trying to recalibrate, but it was in the best way because he was coming to the realization that like, oh, you're not a demon. You're actually just a person.
A person.
And yeah, maybe there's some ground here that we can both have a foot on, so to speak. So talk about that, because I've seen that produce good results in real time. It's really encouraging.
Yeah, by the way, I like that. I'm a mom. When in doubt, I'm a mom.
That's exactly
Lead with
right.
That.
Yes, I'm a mom, and that's exactly right. We're all in this together, and I do think that there are a really big number of people who do want the best for their families and their friends and things like that. And they watched what happened with COVID, and they were absolutely terrified that could become the new norm. And instead of being empathetic, the academic and scientific community was like, what don't you get? And so I think that it's really important to understand why people think the way they do. And instead of jumping to a conclusion that they are somehow bad or they are somehow really trying to take advantage of you or things like that, is to try to get to the root of what is frightening them and have a conversation where they are. So, for example, a lot of people you hear doctors say this a lot, and I think a lot of doctors were frustrated too, and nobody really wants to understand kind of the position doctors were in. During COVID, for example, the doctors were seeing people die right, left, and center. Young people, it was devastating for doctors to watch people come in and be dead in 24 hours. And so that was really disconcerting. So when people came in with questions about the vaccine, the doctors who'd been up at night wrestling with these patients, really trying to do the right thing, got frustrated. And were like, what don't you get? The vaccines are safe and you are an anti-vaxxer because you have these questions. And so pretty soon you had these two well-meaning groups actually pitted against each other, patients and doctors. And I think that the medical establishment is having a hard time recovering from that. And so what I think we can learn from that is you need to meet people where they are and don't assume that because they have questions that they are actually there's malintent or they're questioning you. It's really important to get your ego out of the way when you're discussing things with people, one. And then if you turn out to be wrong about something, you need to come clean about it as soon as you can. And tell people, no, for what they should have done with COVID is the science, say something like this: the science is evolving. We're all in this together. We're learning about it together. This is what we think so far. These policies we think will help protect you. Having questions about the policy is fine. Let's have a discussion about it instead of say, you aren't allowed to talk about this at all. I think that's what we need to learn from this kind of thing, and that's why scientific communication is so important.
It seems that you can tackle a variety of topics that come at you on socials, but what's the topic you wish would just go away? Like, what is one misconception that you are just like, enough already? We've talked about it ad nauseum. Let it go.
Yeah, I wish that the thing that would go away is that the whole discussion about your bias, and therefore you can't talk to the other side. It's not a topic per se, because I'm happy to talk about any topic till the cows come home. But I'm tired of having people put others into categories that where they will refuse to talk to them. So once again, a lot of academics do not want to talk to me, or activists do not want to talk because I'm from industry. But I've been on this academic side of the fence. I know what it's like to be an academic. They haven't been in the industry. They don't know what it's like to be in industry. But they make all these sweeping conclusions about it, which I found very eye-opening when I went over to the industry side. I was wrong about a lot of what I thought about industry, and and I think that people would really benefit from talking to people that they don't know anything about instead of making assumptions. I think it's important to ask questions, and I'm a big fan of the Socratic method because I think it makes people have to reflect on what they're saying, and that often will give people pause. So yeah, I guess maybe the topic that I'm frustrated with is the common perception that industry is evil. I think that's industry is critically important for getting really great innovative ideas off the shelf and out to where it can help the greatest number of people.
We do know a little bit about the industry shill card. It's a fun one.
Yes.
I want to say right. At least once a week on X. I don't know if Anna will have to tell me if that's not prevalent on Instagram too. But on X, it's like almost every post is someone saying, well, of course you guys, right? You're shills. I saw an article from 13 years ago and it made accusations. And so therefore it's the gospel truth. It's like, maybe we're saying it because we think it's correct. Like, let's just start there, right? Is what we're saying correct? Is it contestable? And then maybe go on to the conflicts from there, right? So maybe the final question before we move on this topic is, do people inject that into the conversation so people who are less informed don't look into the details? If that question makes sense. Earlier you said we have useful idiots and then we have grifters. My suspicion is that you have the people who know how the game works who just inject this into the discourse because then no one's going to question them, right? Oh, you're challenging my anti-vaccine thing because you're a pharma shill. You're challenging my pesticide claims about the gut microbiome. That's the one I want to go away. Gut microbiome, go away. I want it to go away. Okay. Anyways.
That's a big one. Big one. There is so much misinformation about that.
You see where I'm going with the question, right? The pharma shill, the corporate shill, whatever. It's there to shut down the discourse. That's my suspicion. What do you think?
Oh, I think that's absolutely true. And I think what it's doing is also, if you have any influence on a group of followers, it then makes them feel like they can't do it either. So it's once again, there's almost a firewall built that has been built over the past 20 years between academics and anybody in industry. That makes it really hard for industry scientists to be able to communicate with people who have really good ideas, and because of the whole shill complaint or the whole bias complaint. What people forget is that everybody's got their own bias, right? If you're getting funding from NIH as an academic, you are going to be very invested in that funding. Right, in order to promote your research and make sure that you can do that research. The same thing is true for industry. If you don't make a profit, you cannot succeed as a company, and you cannot get these wonderful ideas off the shelf and out into the marketplace. So I think that there is a definite interest, competing interest for people who stand to make money off of claims. To want to continue to polarize groups. and I think that the way you get back to the middle is to start asking questions and start talking to people who you might initially think you disagree with. And that's that. We're all in this together. We got to muddle our way back to the middle, because we sure don't want to turn into Sri Lanka, or we sure do not want to bring back diseases of the Middle Ages.
I think it's so interesting. We talk about the term shill, and it sort of brought up a point for me, is that none of our posts, none of your posts on social media, none of our posts are ever followed up with, but here's a product that can help, and so often you see celebrities who have such big platforms online, you never hear of them being called shills, right? It's and they typically are promoting some sort of a supplement, or they've partnered with a company to promote a certain product, and yet we're the ones that get attacked about just spreading science information.
That's
Doesn't
exactly
that hinder
right.
you a little bit, isn't it?
It's very frustrating. And it's very frustrating in medical meetings, especially when I've had recent medical meetings where people have tried to shut things down, like actively have gone out of their way to shut things down. And their claim is, well, there's an industry conflict of interest, this, that, and the other. And the problem is, what doctor's buying soybeans? Right? What am I selling? What am I selling to doctors? I'm not. And I actually start out a lot of the talks that I do with, I promise I won't try to sell you soybeans. I promise I won't try to sell you glyphosate. You can't get glyphosate, in the hardware store anymore, because it's been taken off the shelves. So I am not pushing glyphosate. I am not pushing soybeans. I'm not pushing any of those things to medical audiences. I am trying to share information with them that I think that is critical for them to have. The medical community, especially now with MAHA and HHS, putting in agriculture into the curricula of medical schools, right? And they are wanting to make claims that, doctors should know about soil health and how it impacts human health. Doctors need to get back to pharmacology first, right? And there have been so many things removed for the medical school curriculums or curricula that we're losing the forest for the trees. Doctors learning about soil health is taking away from learning about clinical medicine and how to diagnose and treat disease. And this is where they've really been able to make a huge impact. And so, once again, I'm not trying to sell doctors anything. I'm not trying to sell anybody anything. What I want is people to have is the truth. And that is not recognized enough. And that there are very few science communicators out there who actually have the expertise to bridge that gap. There are doctors who think that they understand agriculture, and they don't. And farmers feel very comfortable talking about the environment, right? Because they grow their food. They need to have healthy soil. They need to be productive, right? So they're very comfortable about talking about soil health and methods of farming and crop protection and all of that kind of stuff. But once you start wandering into the human health claims, they don't have a background to be able to understand that. And so you've got this natural gap that needs to get filled, because these are two critically important professions for the infrastructure of the country. And if you will not talk to each other, because farmers tend to be more conservative and rural, and doctors tend to be more urban and liberal, and if you make that the framework, and doctors think that farmers don't understand what they're doing, and farmers think that doctors don't know what they're doing in terms of vaccines, right? When you get those two critical professions at odds with each other and trying to make decisions for each other, rather than trying to learn from each other, I think you have potential to do real harm to a society.
There's one example that is timely that I think illustrates this perfectly. So it's World Bee Day, it's World Bee Week, whatever we want to call it. This is the time of year where everyone talks about the bees and how we're running out of them. It's never true. Every year we have to say this, we're not running out of bees. There's a myriad reasons we can explain. But I think this is appropriate because this is one of those issues where we start talking about pesticides, insecticides specifically, the farmers are more than happy to tell you about why they use the chemistries that they do. For example, neonicotinoids, neonics. These are seed coatings, treatments that are used to protect certain crops from biting and sucking insects. That's all they are. And they're a significant improvement over what they replaced in most cases.
Yes, exactly.
The farmers will tell you all about that. Liza will tell you all about that because she loves talking about why these chemistries are important. But I see, Liza, this drives me bananas. I see people who, as you just said, within their field, within their medical specialty, very smart, very thoughtful, worth following and listening to. But then they just pontificate and they say, well, this is this chemical and it does this. And then you have to come in and go, pardon me, doctor, that's absolutely wrong. And if you treated your patient based on this information, they might actually die.
Yes, exactly right.
So maybe talk a little bit about, as we move into this discussion about B-Day, talk a little bit about some of the major misunderstandings that I guess doctors have about these chemistries.
Yeah. So doctors have two major misunderstandings just in general. So one is that they feel like pesticides are unnecessary for farming. That's one. And they think when they think about pesticides, doctors are thinking about them, framing them in the sense of, in the perspective of suicide. So when doctors get in contact with patients who've been exposed to pesticides, it's usually a suicidal ingestion. And so they see a very sick patient, and often they're young, and the situation's tragic. And instead of sort of looking at it as dealing with a mental health issue, they wind up rallying and calling for a universal bans on pesticides. Now, and I promise I'll get to the B thing. Several of the pesticides that are used for suicidal attempts that are incredibly toxic in suicidal overdoses are in the category of organophosphates and carbamates. And so those particular groups of pesticides wind up causing nausea, vomiting, diarrhea, a fluid buildup in your lungs and constriction of your bronchioles, which is like asthma, and essentially you drown in your own secretions. It's a terrible death, and it's a terrible thing to watch. And because that has been one of the methods that people have used to commit suicide, there's been a big call for bans on organophosphates and development of safer alternatives. And so in response to that, industry developed neonicotinoids, which act on insect receptors that organophosphates act on, but don't act on the same human receptors. One, they also so you're going to have a completely different level of toxicity if you're exposed to a neonicotinoid. The other thing is that most of the time, you're not even going to be able to ingest large quantities of neonicotinoid because it's used in seed coatings. So it's put directly on the seed rather than having a big bottle of something that you can have access to drink. And so when you put it on the seed, it winds up protecting the seed from insect predation. And there are very strict rules and regulations about how to apply it, and then how much is concentrated in the actual plant, so you're not causing target to off-target insects like bees, and rules about flowering and all sorts of things. So very strictly, these are very strictly regulated and have much less toxicity for people and animals, and there's much less exposure for people. And people say, well, why do you need these kinds of things just in general? Well, if you think about it, Mother Nature adds seed coatings to her babies. So seeds, right? And if we're going to talk about survival of the fittest, you are going to do something to protect your offspring. And Mother Nature will put amygdalin on apple seeds, and cyanogenic compounds on peach pits and apricot pits and things like that. if you eat a apple seed and it comes into contact with your stomach, you will release a small amount of hydrogen cyanide, which is much more toxic than any coating that you would get on a seed from neonics. But once again, the dose makes the poison. You're not going to get cyanide poisoned from getting a couple of apple seeds down into your stomach. And so that tells you that the trace exposures, and this should be really a take-home thing, trace exposures to chemicals, be it made by Mother Nature or us, the dose makes the poison. The trace exposure is not going to cause harm. An apple a day keeps the doctor away. We want to have access to really healthy fruits and vegetables in our diet. And those fruits and vegetables will make pesticidal compounds naturally to protect themselves. And we can use much less toxic synthetic versions that actually protect the fruits and vegetables and give you the most incredible, abundant and affordable supply of healthy food that we've ever had in history. So seed coatings are really important. Now, where did bees come from? Well, the claim is that neonics harms bees, and there was an episode in Germany where the planter had that the seeds had been deposited the wrong way, and there was some aerosolization of dust that from these seed coatings. And there was a bee kill-off, and so that triggered a whole discussion about how do we manage this, and a whole revision on how plantings worked and how the seed coats were applied and things like that to absolutely minimize the effects that neonics have on bees. So once again, neonics are really, really important chemistries that are much less toxic than the chemistries that preceded them, that can help people have access to an affordable, abundant, and healthy food supply.
Can I ask a question? And I've noticed on your X, you said there's no such thing as stupid questions, so I'm going to hold you to that. But does organic farming use neonics? And is there an alternative that they use? Can you talk about that a little bit?
They do not use neonics. I don't know. So they use pesticides. And they use, and there's a list of pesticides that they are allowed to use. But, Mother Nature's organic pesticide that would be in the neonic family would be nicotine. And nicotine has got incredibly high toxicity. It's very much like it has a similar toxicity to organophosphates and things like that. It acts on the same pathway in the nervous system. Once again, if you get nicotine toxicity, you'll have nausea, vomiting, diarrhea, paralysis, you'll fill your lungs up with fluid. It's very similar to organophosphate poisoning. So it's a highly toxic pesticide that farmers used to use, at the turn of the century. And it's all natural. It's Mother Nature. But once again, we've got 10,000 years of experience with organic farming and 50 years of food security in the West. And that's because of scientific advances in agriculture, which include pesticides. And the pesticides that we have now, once again, are much less toxic than the pesticides that were being used in the 40s and 50s, to keep your food supply safe. And not just that, for public health as well, right? You're not going to douse a kid's bed net in nicotine, right? You don't, and in terms of occupational health, tobacco farmers have, there are diseases that tobacco farmers get from harvesting tobacco, and that's related to the nicotine.
I didn't know that. That's fascinating. Okay, well, let's start to wrap up here. Maybe leave us with a little bit of wisdom. I was about to say folksy wisdom, but I don't think that's the way to put it. Just a little bit of insight about, maybe what you've learned over the years in the science communication that you do, and something people can emulate, and maybe something you would like the general public to understand about what you're trying to do.
Yeah, I think that science is nothing short of watching it evolve is nothing short of miraculous. It's amazing what human beings are capable of creating. And when you use scientific principles to make people's lives better, there's real, incredible potential there. All too often, though, those advances get overridden by a doom and gloom scenario. And I wish I could figure out how to tell the story about these unbelievable advances in a way that would override this doom and gloom. I mean, if you think about Paul Ehrlich, who in the 1968, 1969 wrote The Population Bomb and explained to the world that the world was going to be coming to an end and everybody was going to be starving to death because the population was exploding and exceeding the carrying capacity of the earth. And the reason why that actually never took place was because of another man that nobody's heard of. Everybody has heard about Paul Ehrlich and this thing, but nobody had heard of Norman Borlaug. And Norman Borlaug used science to be able to create a wheat variety that went on to feed 1 billion people and prevent that mass starvation that was being predicted. I wish we as science communicators could figure out how to tell Norman Borlaug's story in a way that would make people feel relaxed, that we're going to be okay. We can innovate our way out of difficult situations if we really try to work together for the best outcome. Instead of saying that the past was so much better, the past is the people had all this wisdom and things like that. Well, we've built our science on the shoulders of giants, right? And we've gotten that far because of wonderful advances. And so I wish we could tell our story in a way that was as compelling as possible to reassure the population that, there are really good scientists out there who really want to make the world a better place, and start asking them questions, no matter what kind of background they have, right? And maybe start trying to build bridges a little bit, and we'll muddle through it together.
Really good stuff. As always, thank you so much, Liza, for joining us and answering some questions. If you would like to take Liza up on that advice, you should follow her on X, because she will actually interact with you and answer your questions. Even if you're mean, which is impressive, because I'm not there yet. I'm just not. If you're mean to me, I will be prepared to be done unto. That's what I'm telling you. But if you follow Liza, it's at Dr. Liza MD. She's happy to engage you, and you will learn a bunch of stuff. And it's all free, right? It's none of this.
It's all free.
None of this. Buy my ebook, sign up for my newsletter. She'll just answer your question at Dr. Liza MD. That's true. Although the next time I speak publicly, I think I'm going to bring coupons for glyphosate because I get called a shill anyway. So I'm just going to hey guys, it's ridiculous. I'm not going to do that. At Dr. Liza MD. Anna, of course, is on X as well. It's at A. Dolosky. You're also on Instagram. That whole platform is mysterious to me. How do people find you on Instagram, Anna?
Yeah, so Instagram, our ACTIA handle is at ACSH Science. Lots of good stuff on there. My job is to take our ACTIA experts and the articles they write and turn them into videos that people want to watch and understand and finish. So if you want the video versions of our topics that we cover, ACSH Science on Instagram is where you can find them.
Go check them out. Go check them out. Follow me as well at CamJEnglish. I will answer your questions if I can. If not, I'll just tell you to go talk to Liza. Because that's what I do. Before we go, because you can call me a shill and I don't care, we would love for you to support our organization. You just go to acsh.org, click the donate tab, and you can support our work. Anna's videos, believe it or not, time-consuming and expensive to make. So if you want to support the videos, if you want to help us pay our writers that write all of this awesome, informative content, please support us. We would appreciate your help. If you're an individual, if you're a corporation, I don't care, you're a green monster and you want to give us $20, we accept it because we want to get good information out to people. So thank you for all your support. Thank you for helping us. Thank you for listening to this show, and we will see everyone next time.
Bye-bye.
See you later.